Well, howdy, neighbor. Glad you could join us today. We're up here in beautiful Cloudcroft, New Mexico. Had to run up here take care of a few things here at the Red Pony, our cabin here that we're getting ready to put on the market. It's a beautiful day, other than a little bit windy, and the sun is definitely intense. More intense the sun, the bigger the hat. I've always said that. So today's story is a continuation of creation. Some have suggested that the first chapter of Genesis that we did a few days ago is the story of the overall creation. And the second chapter of Genesis moves in more particularly for the creation of Adam and Eve, the first man and the first woman. So I invite you to hear this story this morning of God's creation, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. After God made man out of the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, he planted a garden in the eastern land of Eden for the man. Underground springs gave the garden water. Every tree was pleasant to see and nourishing as food grew in his garden. In the middle of the trees was the tree of life. Also in the garden was the tree of knowledge of good and of evil. The underground spring was fed by a river with 4 tributaries. The first tributary was called Pishon. It flowed around the land of Havilah, and a land plentiful in gold and onyx. The second river was the Gihon, which flowed around the land of Cush. The Tigris was the third river flowing east to Assyria. The fourth tributary was the Euphrates. And when God put the man in the garden, he gave him instructions. You may eat freely of every tree in the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you may not eat. On the day that you eat of that tree, you will be doomed to die. The man listened to God. Then God called to the man every animal of the land and every bird of the air. The man named the creatures, and the names he gave them were how they were called. God saw that the man needed a partner. He made a deep sleep come upon the man. From the man's chest, God took one of his ribs. Then he closed over the hole in the man's chest cavity with the man's flesh. God took the man's rib, and he made it into a woman. This at last is bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. This one shall be called woman, for out of man this one was taken, said the man. The man and the woman were both naked, but they were not ashamed. Rather, they enjoyed each other's company in the Garden of Eden that God had made for them. One day the woman was startled by a serpent she had not expected to see. The serpent addressed the woman boldly. Did God say you shall not eat from any tree in the garden? Asked the serpent. God said we may eat the fruit of the trees in the garden, but not the fruit of the tree in the middle of the garden. If we touch it, we will die, answered the woman. The serpent sneered, you will not die. God knows instead that when you eat of that tree, your eyes will open and you will be like God. You will know good and evil, said the serpent. The woman inspected the forbidden tree more closely. Like the other trees, this tree was pleasant to see. She wondered if, like the rest, its fruit was good to eat. She took a bite to test the fruit. And then the woman gave the man the fruit to taste. No sooner had they both eaten than their eyes were opened in a new way. They saw how naked they were, and they rushed to make clothing for themselves by sewing fig leaves together. When the evening breeze, they heard the sound of God walking in the garden toward them. The man and the woman hid from God among the trees. God called the man to him. I heard you on the breeze, but I was afraid because I was naked. So I hid myself, said the man. Who told you that you were naked? God inquired. Have you eaten fruit from the tree that I commanded you not to eat? The man told how the woman gave him the fruit, and God turned to the woman for an explanation. The serpent tricked me, and I ate the fruit you told us not to eat, she said. And then God cursed the serpent and ordered it to crawl upon its belly and eat dust for the rest of its days. He told the serpent he would create ill will between the woman's offspring and all serpents forever. People would strike the heads of serpents, and serpents would strike back at the heels of people. God promised to make childbearing painful for women through the rest of time. To the man, God promised a life of toil in the fields to grow what the garden had before given freely. The man and the woman were named. They were called Adam, which means the man, and Eve, because she was the mother of all people. God drove Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden for what they had done. Angels kept them from returning. What a story, huh? Childbirth for women becoming painful. Work becomes toil. And yet, even in this that we have brought on ourselves, for each of us have in our own ways disobeyed God, every one of us. And so we are quite deserving of the punishments that have been given. But that's not the end of the story. God had a plan all along, and Jesus Christ and his death on the cross were definitely part of that plan, and I am so thankful. This day has certainly been a day of toil. Started off with my oldest dog, 14-year-old Molly, not liking that she needed to go back into her kennel, and she bit the fire out of me this morning. Then later on, as if that wasn't enough, I caught a boot heel on the steps there and took a tumble and ended up at the bottom of the steps on the ground. It's definitely been a day of toil for me, and Tana's worked herself to the bone as well. No surprise there. But you know, God is good. God is good, and God is still on the throne, and God is making things happen. He himself has restored us. But that story's yet to come. You hang on there. Don't give up. We've got a lot of God's story to tell. Adios.